Hello and welcome back to another Mindful Fisherman. In this video I'll be taking you through some of the float rigs that I use in my fishing, both for still water and for river fishing. For the purposes of the video, as per my knots video, I'm going to be using brightly coloured sea line and much bigger shot than is required for the float setups. First of all, I'm going to run through some of the still water floats. Right. So the first float setup we're going to look at is the most traditional and is often referred to as the shirt button style. Now, this rig involves two locking shot at the base of the float. The purpose of this is simply to hold the float in place so it doesn't obviously drift up the line or equally fall further down the line where you don't want it to. So that will hold you at your required depth. And then after that we have several equally spaced shot. These make up the rest of the weight required to shot the float down to there for minimal resistance from the fish. Now alongside these shot, what we also have, normally couple of inches, maybe an inch from the hook, is a much smaller shot, and this is what's known as a Telltale Shot. Now what this will do is this will shot the float down that little bit further down to there. Now the reason this is called the Telltale Shot is because if a fish were to pick up your bait and lift this shot off the floor of the lake, then your float would in turn rise ever so slightly, giving a little telltale indication that there's a fish there and interested in your hook bait. Again, this is the most common float setup used by most float anglers. As you can tell, it's called shirt button style because the shot are spaced reasonably equal distances apart, like the buttons on a shirt. Okay. Now, the next shotting pattern that I'm going to show is what's known as a bulk shot. Now, as with the shirt pattern, we have two smaller locking shot, not loads of room between them, just enough for the float to slide a little bit. I tend to like about 1 centimetre. And then further down your line, we have the remainder of the weight set in a little bulk like so. Now when I pinch these onto the line, it's natural for people when you're putting your shot on to pull your line a little bit. This in turn stretches your line, and once stretched it will want to come back again. So to avoid your shot grouping up and warping, which will in turn cause twists, I like to leave a little bit of space between each shot when pinching it on. Also worth noting, if you can, try and get your shot lined up so they all face the same way. This in turn will prevent the rig from spinning when winding it in, stops your line from twisting, again stops all kinds of mess. So as with the shirt button, this bulk will bring it down to about there. And again we have a little telltale shot just down next to the hook, which will bring that down just a little bit further to give a more accurate and a more sensitive indication of fish interest. I don't often use this style, if I'm honest, but it's a very versatile setup and it's functional, it's practical, so there's no reason I wouldn't show it really, just as an option. Okay, now the next setup that I'm going to show is for a sliding float. Now, most floats will have a very, very narrow little eye. Now, you probably can't see this on the camera, but believe me, it's pretty small. To make your rig a little bit easier, pop to your tackle shop and pick up a little bag of these. They're float adapters, and as you can see, they have a little swivel. Hopefully you can see they have a little swivel with a silicone sleeve, a little bit of moisture on the bottom of your float just to add it, help it stick in, and that slides in like so. Now that will run on your line very easily, very little resistance. Okay, so the sliding float rig. What we have is if you've watched my knots video, the infamous elastic band stop knot. This will be set at the depth you want your bait to fish. So depending on how deep a water you may wish to have it dead on the bottom, you could have this 5, 10, 15 foot from your float. Following this, we then have a bead, just a normal running bead. This one is a rubber bead. It doesn't have to be a rubber bead, hard plastic beads work fine, just as long as it slides up and down your line, like so. Then of course we attach our float via float rubber. Another reason I like these adapters is, unlike a standard float setup, when you strike into a fish and the float leaves the water, it's not sat rigid on your line spinning. It will actually just collapse, so it gives it that little bit of flexibility. I don't know whether it has any actual effect on the playing of the fish or landing of the fish, but I quite like that it does that. Then just before our hook link is attached, we will have the bulk of the shot that again will be used to shot our float down. If you're fishing a very large body of water and it's very rough, you may want a bit more of the stem showing, but I like to take it down to just the orange tip. And then, as with our previous two, short distance from your hook, that little Telltale Shot. And that is the sliding float rig that I use. This float is, again, I'm not going to take you through the pike sliding float rigs because they are exactly the same for me. The only difference is, instead of using a waggler with a adapter like this, if it's an inline float, I will slide the float straight onto the line. If it's the method waggler that I showed you in my first video, again, I would slide that straight onto the line. And rather than having a loop knot here with my hook length, I would tie my main line straight onto a snap link. And onto the snap link, I would then attach my trace. The reason I use a snap link rather than just tie the trace straight on means I can just disconnect the trace from my main line, get my rod, my rig, whether it's a float setup or a ledger setup, get that away from the fish so I can focus on hooking the pike. And obviously, again, you wouldn't use a Telltale Shot for pike fishing. So that is the sliding rig. The next rig that I'm going to show you is, I must admit, one of my favorite rigs, and used by a lot of the, I hasten to say, older school generation of tench anglers. It is the lift method. Now, how I like to set this method up is I will attach the waggler float at the base using a silicone float rubber. I will then pinch on a very, very small shot at the base of the float. This is not to cock the float. The purpose of this float for myself, this shot for myself, is basically to keep my depth. If I strike into a fish, there is always the possibility that the float could slide up the line. I want to know that I can then just slide my float back down to that shot, and that's the exact depth that I'm fishing. It means I don't have to bother replumbing my depth or finding anything else out like that again. Okay, now, there are no shot down the line. Hook length is attached with a loop-the-loop knot. And then I like to say a few inches, around about 3 inches from my hook length, I will put one large shot. Now, this shot is in an SSJ or swan shot. Now, there is sufficient weight in this to shot the float right down. Now, this will sit on the bottom, excuse me, on the bottom of the lake, and When the fish comes along, picks up your hook bait, it will then lift this shot off the ground, which will in turn make your float rise. At that point, you know to strike into the fish. This is the most common method of bite indicating with this method. It's very rare that the float will be pulled under. Normally it will lift up out of the waves, hence the name, the lift method. Now, the next float rig that I'm going to show you is, you might be fooled to thinking it is a river rig. You would technically, you're not wrong, but it's a bit of an adaptation of a river rig. It is the flat float, and it is one of the most simple float rigs you will ever use. Personally, I love it. It's great for fishing very close in. It's not really a distance rig, you can't get the distance on it. It involves just a standard small straight waggler float. I like to thread it through the eye at the base, and then using a silicone rubber, attach it at the top of the float like so. There are no shot at all going down the line, with the exception of one tiny little dust shot. And now this will help obviously get your bait down through the water. It's not enough to cock the float, it's not enough to sink the float. It will have no impact whatsoever on how this float fishes. The sole purpose of this shot is to add a little bit of weight to your hook length, just to get it down through the water that little bit quicker. Now, this float will, as the name suggests, lay flat on the surface of the lake, and the bite indication for this method will normally be the float standing up, and then, as with most floats, sinking. However, before it gets to that point, I normally would strike, because if it gets to the stage where the float's starting to stand up, or has in fact stood up, you can normally, it's safe to assume that the fish has in fact taken your bait. Okay, now those are just the types of float rigs that I use personally for stillwater or lake fishing. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to fish them personally. They work for me. Hopefully they will also work for you. I'm now going to move on and show you some of the float rigs that I use for fishing a river. Alright guys, now we're going to have a look at the main two types of float rigs that I use for fishing a river. And the first one, very similar to the first rig that I showed you for still waters, is the shirt button shotting pattern. Now, you may be wondering why I'm showing you the same shotting pattern a second time. The main reason for this is because it's ever so slightly different. Now, with the waggler floats, obviously we fixed them bottom side using a split shot to the left and to the right of the eye on the float. The difference with river fishing and fishing a stick float is that you attach the float top and bottom. Sometimes I like to use one in the middle, using little silicone float rubbers. Now, as with the lift method, in order to keep the depth that I want to fish at from changing, I will then place a very small shot right at the base of the float. Then going down the line, again, very much the same as with the still water from this point. You've got equally spaced apart, or as equal as you can get, the rest of the shot to make up the bulk of the shot for the float that you choose to use. And then again, little telltale shot, just a short distance from the hook. And that is the shirt button method that I use for fishing a river. The other shotting pattern I use for fishing a river is similar to the still water float, is the bulk shotting method. Now, again, the float is locked top and bottom, and with this one I like to put a third one on the stem. depth is marked with a locking shot, and bulk of the weight is made up in small groups. You can't have them all at the same level. If you wish, you could have all the weight there, but I like to split mine into smaller groups spaced down the line. And then again, your Telltale Shot is just a short distance from your hook, like so. Now, very basic float rigs. As I say, I like to keep a lot of my fishing very, very, very simple if I can. There's no point making something more complicated than it needs to be. Bit of a shorter video this week. The next video I will be uploading will be on how I set up my ledger and feeder rigs. Hopefully you guys will come back to have a look at that. And following that, I do have a trip out planned. I found a nice little stretch of Club River within a acceptable lockdown traveling distance from my home. So I will be setting up a couple of rods and heading down there and see if I can't get a fish or two. So, as I say, that's been the float rigs that I use. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching. Hopefully you've picked up a couple of things. Yeah, if you like it, hit the thumbs up, guys. If you've got anything that you want me to do in future videos, stick a comment down. I'm always happy for feedback. Positive or negative, if you so choose. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. Hit the little bell next to it. The alerts will come through. You'll get notified as soon as I've got a video up and running. And hopefully we'll see you on, well, I won't see you, but hopefully you'll see me on my next video. Thank you very much for watching again, guys. See you soon.